excited and privileged to ask Senator Al Franken to come up. Senator Franken has been a strong ally of people struggling to keep their homes in the foreclosure crisis. We are very fortunate to have Senator Franken fighting for us. Also, he might be willing to share us something about how to keep advocating during a recount, but we'll find out. So again, thank you very much, and Senator Franken, join.
Thank you, Chip, for the kind introduction, although I'm sick of the recount jokes. And now we're going to have a new spate of them, hopefully for a pretty short time. It's an honor to be here today and to be part of this important discussion on how to provide affordable housing for all Minnesotans. And I'm happy that my colleague Keith Ellison will be speaking as well. Keith always fights a good fight in Washington. We're honored, yes. We're honored to have Secretary Donovan here with us, and I want to thank him for his leadership in affordable housing in this country. His initiatives like the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities are having a positive impact already here in Minnesota. I'm proud that this program has already brought $5.8 million to Minnesota to integrate affordable housing, yes, transportation, and green jobs. These funds will make our state a better place to live and to work and to go to school and have transportation to go to work and live in an environment that is healthy and friendly, which is a real testament to Senator Donovan's leadership. And who would have thought that housing and transportation and the environment in which you live were somehow linked? What I like to say about Secretary Donovan is that overlooking the obvious is something he doesn't do. And that is, I asked him if I could describe him that way, and he said he'd take that as a compliment, and believe me, it is in Washington. Housing is the foundation of our communities because when families have stable housing, kids are more likely to stay in school. They get to know their neighbors, and our communities become better places to live. But without affordable housing, it's nearly impossible for individuals to have steady work, to be healthy, or to give back to their communities. And the reality is that the current foreclosure and unemployment crises have shaken this foundation to its core. Every week, I hear from constituents who are facing foreclosure or just can't find affordable housing. These stories are from across the state, from here in St. Paul up to Big Falls and down to Caledonia. Just last month, Scott Marshall was in my office. He's a truck driver from East Bethel who does a lot of community work in his spare time, and with the economic downturn, he took a hit in his income and fell behind in his mortgage payments. But Scott's a responsible guy, and he contacted his lender and requested a loan modification through the HAMP program. For months, he was told that his modification request was under review. But he also heard that there was a sheriff's sale scheduled on his home. So as you can see, he was receiving pretty mixed messages, and it's a pretty terrifying situation for a homeowner. So Scott made repeated calls to the bank, letting them know that the sale was approaching. A few weeks before the sale, the bank said the sale had been postponed, although they refused to provide written confirmation. A few days before the sale, Scott called back the bank again and was told there was no record or plans to postpone the sale. He made repeated calls to find out the status of his case, and one business day before the sale was scheduled, he was contacted by the lender. The lender said that Scott's HAMP application was being reviewed and that the lender would request a postponement of the sale. However, it turned out that the postponement never went through, so Scott's home was sold at a sheriff's sale. This is unacceptable, and the worst part about it is that Scott is not alone. Too many Minnesotans, too many Americans are trying to do the right thing. We're still almost literally having the rug pulled out from under them. That's why I proposed months ago creating the Office of the Homeowner Advocate, which had broad bipartisan support in the Senate. It passed as an amendment to a bill with about 67 votes, although the underlying bill hasn't passed yet. And I work closely with colleagues on both sides of the aisle. The purpose of the Office of the Homeowner Advocate is to assist homeowners and housing counselors and housing lawyers in resolving problems with the HAMP program. Because right now the HAMP program is sort of dependent on the servicers of the mortgages to provide accurate information, and very often they don't have your back the same way that that my office of the homeowner advocate would through the Treasury Department. And I've worked very closely with many of you here in this room to create this amendment. I'm hopeful that it will get sent to the President's desk soon. I've also been calling for ample funding for affordable housing programs, and just last month I demanded that the federal government thoroughly investigate the mortgage servicing scandals that are occurring across the country. We need to keep working together on all these fronts: funding affordable housing, fighting fraud, and supporting homeowners to stay in their homes. There's a road to economic recovery ahead of us, and we must work together every step of the way in order to bring affordable housing to our Minnesota towns and cities and families. And your work here at Homes for All at your conference is part of this journey toward making affordable housing a reality for all Minnesotans. The ideas you generate here will provide a catalyst for new public-private partnerships, provide the framework for public policy, and ultimately improve affordable housing in our state. We're fortunate in Minnesota to have advocates like all of your organizations, Habitat for Humanity, Minnesota Housing Partnership, the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, McKnight, and the Family Housing Fund. You are the real champions for Minnesota families, and I'm committed to standing with you. Know that. And fighting beside you. Fighting beside you for affordable housing and for fair treatment for homeowners. I'm proud to be your voice, or a voice. You have other voices here. You have Betty McCollum, you have Keith Ellison, you have Amy Klobuchar. And I look forward to hearing from you about our next opportunities to work together. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be with you today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator Franken. Al Franken was also one of the co-signers and supporters of the National Housing Trust Fund, too. I forgot to point that out. Next, I'll bring back. I will bring back Representative Ellison, who will introduce our HUD secretary. So, Representative Ellison, come on back.
Hey there, everybody. How you doing? How's lunch? Pretty good? Now, look, you guys can't embarrass me in front of the secretary. You got to be up and alive and awake during this presentation, okay? So let's hear it from you a little bit. Let's make some noise a little bit. Good job. Good job. Thank you, and thank you for all of the work you do. If I started naming names about the heroes in this room, I would have everybody to name, and we still have to listen to the secretary, so that wouldn't work. But I want you to know that I'm so proud of you and so honored to work with you and learn from you. And I want you to know that if we combine our energies to make sure that housing is available and safe and green for all Minnesotans, there's no way they can stop us. Absolutely no way. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce HUD Secretary Shaun Donovan. Secretary Donovan dedicated his career and his work to providing affordable housing to individuals and communities in need. And when Secretary Donovan was appointed to lead HUD in 2009, President Obama sent a clear message that affordable housing and a stable housing market were top priorities for his administration. This was clear because Secretary Donovan has the expertise, both substantively and in terms of leading affordable housing agency in the city of New York, in the complex portfolio of affordable housing programs overseen by HUD. And as we know, this expertise couldn't have come at a better time given the challenges in our nationwide housing market and the resulting need to use our affordable housing resources to their fullest. Secretary Donovan has worked in numerous capacities, the nonprofit and public sectors, on a variety of housing issues. Immediately before coming to Washington to lead HUD, Secretary Donovan served as the commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing and Preservation Development. During his time of leading the HPD, Secretary Donovan focused on efforts to maintain and increase affordable housing units available to the renters living in New York City. Since coming on board at HUD, Secretary Donovan and his staff have pushed forward on a number of affordable housing priorities. This has included the agency's push to fulfill its mandate to affirmatively further fair housing, in other words, to ensure inclusive housing in all communities. Mr. Secretary, please know that HUD's proactive, fair housing efforts have not gone unnoticed, even though they are long overdue. In addition, that's right. In addition, Secretary Donovan has overseen HUD at a time when property values and housing prices suffered a huge decline across the country. Some estimates show that about $6.6 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in homeowner equity has disappeared by the end of 2008 as compared to its peak in 2006. Among the many responses HUD has taken to the housing market decline and resulting foreclosure crisis is the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and I know many of you work with it here locally, and of course it has been very important to stabilizing our communities. The NSP program provided grants to specified regions in order to combat the various impacts that foreclosures can have on a community. Additionally, Secretary Donovan and his staff had devoted their time and energy to developing proposals to help protect and revitalize the nation's public housing program. And in a little while, we'll be talking more about that in the breakout session. It's fair to say that this focus on public housing can only be described as unprecedented when compared to recent years, and I look forward to discussing this more in the breakout session. Without any more delay, please put your hands together and give a very warm, strong, proud Minnesota welcome to Secretary Shaun Donovan.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. It is wonderful, wonderful to be here again. And I want to start just by thanking Congressman Ellison. Keith, thank you for that very warm introduction. But much more important than that, thank you for your partnership and your leadership in Washington. It goes without saying, I know you all know this, but the 5th District here in Minnesota is enormously lucky to have Congressman Ellison. But I can also say, as a lifelong houser, and I can say that with pride in this room, we are all around the country lucky to have Keith Ellison in Congress. I have, over the last 22 months, had the chance to get to know him well and to have discussions about the impact the foreclosure crisis is having not just on owners, but on renters, how we stop the scourge of lead poisoning of our children, and as you will hear more about later, how we transform our rental programs from the 20th century programs that we have today into the 21st century programs that so many of you have shown us the way on here in Minnesota. So let me just say, and this is with no disrespect to his colleagues in the House, I wish every one of the congresspeople I could work with was like Keith Ellison. He's been a remarkable leader. Let's give him a hand. Let me also thank Senator Franken, who, among his many things that he's championed in housing, if you hadn't heard, was as a co-sponsor of the National Housing Trust Fund. And the broad range of leadership he's provided, the moral leadership as well as the legislative leadership on housing that we need in this crisis. Dan Bartholomew, who in many different careers now has been a remarkable leader. Dan, thank you. Thank you for your partnership and all the work on sustainable communities that you've done with me and my team. You've been remarkable. And finally, Chip Halbach with Minnesota Housing Partnerships. Chip, thank you. Chip and I have had the pleasure of working together, serving on boards together, and he's done a remarkable, remarkable job leading here as well. So you all are incredibly lucky to have this team here. And in fact, I always love coming back to Minnesota to hear what you're doing, because you are in so many ways on the leading edge of what it means to try not only to get affordable housing right, but to get community development right. You have been a bright, shining light across this country in the midst of this crisis. Thank you all for your leadership and the remarkable work that you're doing. Given the theme of the conference here, I particularly wanted to recognize the work that you've done on sustainable communities. You get it. And that work has always been important, but is particularly important today with so much on the line for our families and for our country. So let me try today to talk a little bit about what the Obama administration is doing to help you build the strong, inclusive, sustainable communities that Minnesota families need to succeed in the 21st century. I also want to talk about the historic affordable housing investments we've made over the last 22 months. And I want to talk about the way that we're trying to change the way we do business at HUD to get the most out of those investments, working with you to realize your own vision for success, not the one-size-fits-all approach that HUD has taken, frankly, for too many years. As much as you all know, this work began with the Recovery Act, which has rebuilt thousands of homes, highways, and bridges, and put more than 3 million Americans back to work. And while we still have a long way to go, we now have 10 straight months, as of last Friday, 10 straight months of private sector job creation. When President Obama signed the Recovery Act into law, he said it would do three things: create jobs. We were losing over 750,000 jobs a month. It's so easy to forget that. It's not that long ago. And now 10 straight months of private sector job creation. But he also said it would help those harmed by the economic crisis and lay the foundation for long-term growth. Here in Minnesota, the Recovery Act is helping you realize all three of those goals in your communities. I saw it for myself at the Cedars in Minneapolis, where the $100 million HUD is providing Minnesota in public housing capital funds is helping create the nation's first green, culturally sensitive assisted living program. The Recovery Act is also jumpstarting the development of 32,000 affordable homes across the nation that were stuck in the pipeline by the recession through $2.25 billion in the tax credit assistance program, which alone is providing over $28 million to Minnesota. In less than 21 months, the Recovery Act has already finished renovating, in 21 months, finished renovating over 315,000 apartments around the country. Almost a quarter of public housing units have gotten some form of renovation thanks to the Recovery Act already. In addition, 18,000 new homes are under construction, and many of those to green standards with energy-efficient improvements, saving money for owners and for residents alike. In all, nearly a third of the $14 billion that we received at HUD in Recovery Act funding can be used for greening America's public and assisted housing stock, reducing energy costs, lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and creating jobs. At the same time, the Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Program, which has provided about $22 million to Minnesota, has prevented and ended homelessness for more than 750,000 people around this country, and not a moment too soon in the midst of this economic crisis. No less an authority than the U.S. Conference of Mayors reports that HPRP is, quote unquote, fundamentally changing the way communities respond to homelessness at the local level, keeping people in their homes rather than waiting for them to become homeless, and quickly returning those who fall into homelessness to the stable, permanent housing they need. Indeed, in many ways, it was HPRP that paved the way for Opening Doors, the first ever federal strategic plan to end homelessness, which I was proud to present to President Obama earlier this year, and which wouldn't have been possible without the efforts of so many of you here in this room. The most far-reaching and ambitious plan in our history to put the nation on a path toward ending all types of homelessness, and the culmination of more than a decade's work in communities around the country. This plan will end chronic homelessness and veterans' homelessness in 5 years, while ending homelessness for families, youth, and children within a decade. The fact is, we have all proven that we can house anyone. Our job now is to house everyone, to prevent and end homelessness, all homelessness. And Carolyn, I know I have your support when I say, together, all of us in this room will end homelessness. Indeed, with our historic investments, a budget this year that includes full funding for the public housing operating subsidy, and a proposed budget for next year that includes, even in a very difficult fiscal environment, a record number of people to be served by the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and $1 billion to capitalize for the first time ever the National Housing Trust Fund, which, by the way, Senator Franken was a co-sponsor of. With all of these investments, it is very clear that the federal government is back in the affordable rental housing business, and it is about time that we were. But as Minnesota knows as well as anyone, and as this conference recognizes, affordable rental housing is only the first step toward building sustainable communities of opportunity and hope. That's what you're doing about a dozen blocks from here, where construction of a major light rail along University Avenue connecting Minneapolis and St. Paul has the potential to open up access to jobs and opportunity for the neighborhoods that it serves. Unlike the process that occurred 40 years ago, when an interstate was built to run directly through the Central Corridor, tearing apart neighborhoods and cutting them off from opportunity. Third sector partners like Twin Cities LISC have worked to ensure that community stakeholders, from residents to local financial institutions, are at the table, engaged, and making their voices heard. It was that kind of holistic, community-driven model with creative, locally focused thinking from the bottom up that spurred the Obama administration to launch our Partnership for Sustainable Communities. Uniting the efforts of HUD, the Department of Transportation, and the Environmental Protection Agency, the idea behind the partnership is simple: to boost economic development and ensure that all Americans can afford to live in communities with access to employment, schools, and transportation options. Last month, with our partners in the Department of Transportation, we awarded nearly $170 million in planning grants to ensure both regions and local communities across the country have more housing and transportation options, more energy independence, and will be more economically competitive. For the first time in the history of federal grant competitions, these awards were jointly reviewed and selected by all three agencies: HUD, DOT, and EPA. Now, if you haven't been a federal bureaucrat, you may not understand quite what it means to have three agencies working together to award these funds. But this partnership isn't just about meetings and better coordination. It's about making sure that in a tight budget environment, our agencies are investing every taxpayer dime with precision. For these funds, we were inundated with applications from 49 states, 2 territories, and the District of Columbia, offering bold, unique proposals to plan and build sustainably based on local resources, local landscape, culture, and integrity. I'm proud that we awarded a $5 million award, a regional planning grant, to your Metropolitan Council right here in the Twin Cities. Bringing together the Twin Cities, Minnesota Housing, the county's Transit Improvement Board, Hennepin and Ramsey counties, and the McKnight Foundation, Minnesota's application had the right partners and the right vision for success, focusing on 5 major corridors to coordinate land use and development with transit investment. Fixing our economy won't happen overnight. After all, the disconnect between the places where people live and work results from decades of poor planning and misplaced priorities. As a result, the average American now spends 52 cents of every dollar they earn on housing and transportation costs alone. But by acting now, we can create jobs today. We can ensure parents spend less time driving and more time at home with their kids, that more families live in safe, stable communities near good schools and jobs, and that more Minnesota businesses have access to capital and the talent that they need to grow and prosper. Above all, we can lay the foundation for sustainable economic prosperity for generations to come. Of course, at the same time we start helping communities that share problems start sharing solutions at the regional level, you only need look at foreclosure patterns to recognize the challenges communities face at the neighborhood level as well. Through 3 rounds, HUD's awarded nearly $7 billion in neighborhood stabilization funds to help communities struggling with concentrated foreclosures turn vacant and abandoned homes into the affordable housing that families need. But as anyone who's helping fix up REO properties and stop neighborhood decline knows, the challenge with NSP isn't just the dollars. It's the capacity of local governments and agencies that have been devastated by budget cuts. It's having to establish individual relationships with each different financial institution and negotiate the best price one house at a time. That's why we're providing the tools to localities that help them turn a crisis into an opportunity, so that at the same time that you address pressing problems like foreclosures, you're also able to really reimagine the future of your communities. That's why we've encouraged NSP grantees to partner with the third sector of nonprofits and community development corporations, who not only know how to solve neighborhood problems, but in many places have become our most innovative affordable housing developers and some of our most important civic institutions. And it's why I announced in September the historic First Look, a partnership between HUD, the National Community Stabilization Trust, and the nation's leading financial institutions, helping communities across the country purchase vacant properties quickly at a discount and before they hit the open market. You only need look at a city like Minneapolis to understand just how effective this wholesale strategy can be. Working with the trust, Minneapolis was able to buy up 260 properties in targeted neighborhoods, which they're beginning to rehabilitate to green standards and sell to responsible homeowners through a local down payment program. With a $5.6 million investment from the federal government in the first round of NSP, the Twin Cities Community Land Bank leveraged an additional $30 million in resources and the partnership of for-profit developers. It was that success that led us at HUD to award the Twin Cities another $38 million in the second round of NSP. And as a result, in the most heavily foreclosure-impacted neighborhoods in a community like North Minneapolis and others, home prices are gaining and private market recovery is underway. What makes this approach to NSP unique isn't just that we're working with different servicers or buyers, but rather a belief that federal investments can be game-changing, market-driven, and cost-effective. Game-changing in the sense that instead of just buying the next 10 or 20 distressed properties that become REO across an entire city or county, we can help communities selectively pick the most strategically important properties. Market-oriented in the sense that instead of working with a few REO servicers, we can work with financial institutions who manage 75% of the nation's REO. Cost-effective in the sense that instead of using a staff-intensive, one-off property acquisition approach, our partners have access to automated, state-of-the-art mapping and property management tools, so communities can spend less time and energy thinking about spending taxpayer dollars and more on getting the most out of them. Now, having been a local housing official, I know all too well that game-changing, market-oriented, and cost-effective may not be terms normally associated with HUD in the past. But with new partners and new tools, we're committed to ensuring every community in America will in the years to come. Of course, when most people hear the term sustainability, they think of environmental sustainability. But this audience knows full well that you can't have a sustainable community if you have an underlying system that promotes segregated development patterns and isolated poverty. By now, many of you are familiar with HUD's Choice Neighborhoods initiative, which builds on and improves the legacy of Hope 6 by bringing to bear private capital and mixed-use, mixed-income development tools to transform not only public housing, but all housing in a neighborhood. Just as importantly, it will make the nonprofits and the private sector who participated in Hope 6 full partners in this transformation. But everyone in this room knows that public housing won't be remade with a handful of grants each year. Right now, America's public housing program faces a backlog of unmet capital needs as high as $30 billion. The challenge isn't limited to public housing. Older programs that subsidize tens of thousands of units lack any real strategy that would help keep them affordable for the years to come. Already, our country has lost 150,000 units of public housing in the last 15 years. 10,000 homes a year, every year for 15 years. That's why President Obama and I have proposed a 21st century strategy to preserve affordable housing for America's most vulnerable families that we call transforming rental assistance. I'm proud that we were able to provide an additional $4 billion in public housing capital funding as part of the Recovery Act last year. It was one of the most critical parts of the Recovery Act. But let's be clear. That funding at best meets a fifth of the estimated capital backlog in public housing properties. And given the size of the federal deficit and the very difficult fiscal environment that lies ahead, it's clear the federal government will not be able to finish the job alone. And failing to finish the job means the billions the government has invested in public and assisted housing over the last 70 years will be lost forever. The programs touched by TRA house over 4 million households, nearly 2/3 of which are extremely low income, and 2.5 million of whom are elderly or disabled. That's why we're proposing to shift the current public housing capital and operating subsidies to a single rental subsidy stream that will attract capital from private and other public sources, $7 billion alone in the first year, and $25 billion in all. That's $25 billion that's sitting on the sidelines right now that could be invested in public housing, but can't be because of antiquated rules that were developed nearly a half century ago. At the same time, TRA would infuse our public housing system with the capital it needs to preserve this housing. It would also improve the system in 3 key ways. The first is simplicity. Right now, HUD has 13 different deep rental assistance programs, each with its own rules, administered by 3 different operating divisions that contract with more than 20,000 separate entities. No one would ever intentionally set up a system this complicated. And we've seen how this proliferation of programs and delivery systems makes your job providing housing to families much, much harder and wastes money as well. You know, no insult to lawyers in the room, and my mother is one, but there are better ways we can spend our money housing families than the incredibly complex deals that we put together, the soft costs we see, the months and years spent waiting to get affordable housing online. Many of our nation's public housing authorities have become real innovators and entrepreneurs. But the barriers this system throws up to using other financing streams and working with social service providers makes you do that job with one hand tied behind your back. The time has come to make our programs easier to use so that our local partners can focus more on the needs of your communities and less on complying with inflexible, one-size-fits-all rules. The time has come for the federal government to get its own house in order. The second principle is choice. Today, too many residents of public and assisted housing can't move to a different neighborhood to find a better job or further their education because moving means giving up their subsidy. That's simply not right. TRA reflects our belief that families should be able to choose where they live without fear of losing rental assistance. The third principle is community. Everyone in this room knows that you can't have a truly sustainable community if you have a system that promotes segregation and isolation. But quite frankly, that's what our current system does too often. And to be clear, that's not the fault of our PHAs. It's because most families live in housing that's financed, developed, and managed in a way that can be integrated with the communities around them, while the 2.5 million poor families served by HUD's oldest programs don't. TRA will put an end to the parallel housing system in America by encouraging a mix of uses and incomes that link public housing to investments in neighborhood schools, local businesses, and other community anchors. Just as importantly, the renovation it would spur, we estimate would create 300,000 jobs, building and preserving affordable housing in the communities that need it most, and providing jobs for the people that need them most. I believe, and President Obama believes, that we can do better. And thank goodness that someone like Congressman Ellison does as well. At the panel following my remarks, the Congressman and I will discuss his legislation that builds on and refines the administration's proposal and says once and for all that we will do better. Reflecting months of listening to the people who know our public housing best, he's made critical changes to our proposal, from ironclad protections to maintain public ownership and requirements for properties to remain permanently affordable, to a more workable resident choice option and the strong, fair resident rights families who live in these properties deserve. And I'll be discussing them more in detail with him at the next panel. I hope you'll be there. Over half a century ago, in 1954, the Warren Court's unanimous decision in Brown versus Board of Education stated that, quote, separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, end quote. Well, a separate housing system for low-income families is also inherently unequal. Let's work together. Let's work together to complete this unfinished business of the civil rights movement and ensure that all our families can live in sustainable, vibrant communities of opportunity and choice. For me, for President Obama, for Congressman Ellison, Senator Franken, and so many of you here today, it all comes down to a very simple belief that when you choose a home, you don't just choose a home. You also choose schools for your children and transportation to work. You choose a community and the choices available in that community. A belief that our children's futures should never be determined or their choices limited by the zip code that they grow up in. Like our president, I know change is never easy, that revitalizing our nation's communities won't happen overnight, nor will it happen because of any one policy or the work of any one agency or one party. But working together, in common purpose, in partnership, we can tackle our toughest challenges. We can push back on this crisis. We can build upon the remarkable sense of change and possibility you're catalyzing right here in communities across this state. And most important of all, we can create a true geography of opportunity for every American. Ensuring that we do is our shared goal today. Let us rise to meet it. Thank you.